All right, everybody. I got a fan request for Fred Rogers, aka Mr. Rogers chart. I'm definitely going to get to that. I just want to do Ozzy Osbourne because obviously 4 days ago from I'm recording this, he unfortunately died, and that was like a huge blow to me. Right after that, Hulk Hogan died. Even that guy is a raging narcissist. That he was like a huge part of my childhood too. So I got two different birth time here for Ozzy. Obviously, neither are quite accurate, but we're going to have to go through both the charts and differentiate it. I do think it's probably the 6 a.m. one, but we're going to go through both kind of one by one and kind of piece them together and see what we got. So, first, we'll start off with the sun. So, in the 6 a.m. chart, we have the sun. It's in Sagittarius in the first house. So, let's break down the sun a little bit. It's kind of ultimate path to everything here. So everything got its kind of mishmash into the sun and Sagittarians with someone who traveled a lot, which he did because he was in Black Sabbath and his solo stuff. He went all over the world playing music, finding a higher philosophy, a higher belief system. I know when he was younger, for the shock rock element, they did the satanic stuff. I don't think he was ever satanic, but he was Christian. And this is all about himself. The sun in the first house is one of the reasons why I agree the 6 a.m. chart is a little bit closer. So it's going to be right along here with his ascendant, which is the path of where he needs to go, which is in Scorpio. So he was this dark embodiment of a character in their band name. It came out like with 68 or 69 was Black Sabbath. That was based off of a horror movie from a really long time ago. And they sang about war and the end of the world. And they're very political and things like that. Then when he got older, he was known as the Prince of Darkness. He wore black. I remember back when they first started Black Sabbath, they wore like turquoise and all these rainbow neon colors and stuff like that. So it took them a while as Black Sabbath to kind of get the dark imagery we can associate with Scorpio, but Black Sabbath were kind of innovators of heavy metal, I think. Tony Iommi, the guitarist from Black Sabbath, worked in a factory before that, and he chopped the tip of his fingers off in some machinery on accident. So, in order to play guitar still, he had to lower the guitar down where the strings were looser, and he melted glass or plastic on his fingers, and that made that heavier, darker sound. And that's where heavy metal was born. A lot of people contribute that to Led Zeppelin, but they're a bunch of hippies singing about flowers and shit. But anyways, getting a little carried away here. So here in this chart, this makes a lot of sense too in a lot of ways. But we got the Sagittarian sun in the 11th house, and we got a Capricorn rising. So we already talked about Sagittarius sun. So someone who likes to explore and travel and all that stuff and philosophy and religion and things like this is going to be more associated with groups. Well, yeah, he is the front man of both of his bands. He was Ozzy of the Ozzy Osbourne, obviously, and it was about him. This placement makes a lot of sense too, but I think just him just being the mega star that he is. But then again, we got Jupiter and Mars that's conjunct the ascendant as well, but we'll get there. So this is about groups and people he associates with and someone who's gonna be big on friends. I know he did a lot of collaborative work with a lot of other people. Mercury is making that loose conjunction there as well as it is in the first house. Yeah, but I think again, going back here to the 6 a.m. chart, it is going to make a lot more sense for it being in the first house, in my opinion, because he was a singer and his voice, it was his voice and everything like that. And he must have had with the Chiron there jumping ahead, but a lot of wounds and stuff about himself. And I think that's more than that than the career. But I know he did grow up poor, so that Chiron on 10th house can make a lot of sense too. But going back to this chart, that's a pain in the ass. You can see here that got a Capricorn ascendant, so someone that's bossy and controlling, and that doesn't really seem like Ozzy. And you get the first impression, you don't see like this cold, hard, evil bastard. I guess that's kind of like what he have tried to be, but it didn't really work all that well. I mean, because of the Black Sabbath thing, who didn't love Ozzy? Ozzy was this crazy bastard, and he was relevant for like 55 years, and but people didn't see him as this cold-hearted, mean, cruel, bossy, draconic person. They seen him as this fun-loving guy who partied and had a lot of fun and took things way to extremes. He was all about extremes and stuff. So I think this makes a lot of sense here. And if we have this with the Scorpio ascendant, the ruler is Pluto, which is here in the ninth house. And if we go to this chart here, the ruler would be Capricorn. So the ruler would be Saturn, and Saturn here is in the eighth house. So we'll just keep an eye on those planets and get a further analysis as we go. Let's talk about his moon here a little bit. So if we look at the 10 a.m. chart, we would have a Capricorn moon in the first house. So this is somebody who wears their emotions on the sleeve. The moon sign is your kind of emotional state, what makes you feel safe, what makes you feel secure, how you're intuitive. And he has a Capricorn moon either way, which doesn't really fit him, but I guess he really didn't show a lot of emotions. I know he grew up in a lot of poverty and things like that. And of course, he got famous and that changed a lot. But he isn't someone that's really this over emotional thing. But then again, it'd be very blunted in Capricorn. So going back to this Capricorn moon, so I don't think it's somebody that would just blatantly go mostly off emotions throughout life. He didn't really come off as emotional, but again, you don't know him what he's like in behind the curtain and what he's really like in real life. I guess a lot of accounts say it's kind of a lot like Donald Trump is what he is what you get, but I don't think like he may compartmentalize his emotions. It's making a fairly loose trine over here to that Mercury and Jupiter and the ascendant, or not a trine, but it's making a slightly loose conjunction there to Mars and Jupiter and the ascendant there, but I get a gist that it's more of a second house moon, which his chart suggests over here. Where's the pain? So we got the Capricorn moon in the second house. Maybe he's more disciplined about money. Maybe he has like Sharon. Maybe this represents a woman in his life and she's the one that manages these resources. And maybe he just abuses this stuff because, like I said, Mars and Jupiter, it's not very far away. It's making this loose conjunction here. You know, obviously he had a lot of substance abuse problems. Maybe he qualified his emotions and spent it a lot on drugs and he needed that woman to control it and channel it. I know people give Sharon a really bad rap about, oh, she's just all about money, this and that. But without her, Ozzy probably just spiraled out of control and wouldn't have been able to really accomplish much of anything besides being dead in the gutter. So maybe there's that feminine influence about money and stuff like that because he grew up in such poverty. Then he said he became famous and rich at 19, so it just blew the top off that. So I think a second moon is a little bit more applicable there. Let's go check out his Mercury, which is 5 degrees away from his sun over here in the first house in this chart. So again, like I said, Sagittarius. So singing about foreign lands. I know he even when he sung, he sounded more American, but when he talked, he definitely sounded British. So maybe he tried to emulate his voice into sounding foreign to him. So if he were to try to sound more like an American, that would have been it. And it's about the first house. So he was known as a singer. He was known for his voice and his writing and things like that. And it's just 5 degrees away from the sun in the first house. So I think that's going to be a big part of who he is and who he was, obviously, because he was a singer. But let's look at the other chart here. So if you look at this, it's in the 11th house again. So he's not like this group speaker, but I guess again, he is the front man of his bands that he was in. He has Ozzy and the Ozzy Osbourne group. And of course, he's the front man of Black Sabbath. So that kind of makes a lot of sense, but I'm definitely resonating a lot more with that. But he wasn't like preaching. He was very religious and stuff like that. We go back to the satanic elements of both of his bands, and I think that was just more the shock value, especially during the 80s, during the satanic panic and stuff. But that's probably what he started that really. So he was very Christian according to him, but of course he was one of those hypocritical Christians, partied and drank and did all these drugs and prayed at the end of the night, and he's forgiven. But yeah, won't hold that against him. I love Ozzy. But I'm going against Mercury in the first house more. Maybe I'm just biased and partial, but hey, while we're here, let's look at the Venus. So if we look at this, his north node, which we haven't got to yet, it's in Taurus. So Hitler volume here, again, it's making this loose conjunction here to the south node. So the ruler of his north node is conjunct the south node. If we go back and watch Hitler's chart, which you can definitely watch up here, you can see that the ruler of his north node was conjunct to south node. It's making a pretty loose conjunction at 7 degrees, but I think we're still going to count that. There's going to be a lot of influence. But looking, just isolating his Venus in Scorpio in the ninth house here. So again, that's somebody who's kind of seductive, maybe kind of lustful person. I know there was some allegations of affairs that he had against his wife Sharon, maybe going on the road and touring, probably gets kind of lonely. Maybe Sharon wasn't there all the time and maybe sampled from other menus. He was out. Obviously, Venus is about the five senses. He definitely indulged in alcohol and drugs and things like that. So that could be definitely a big element, especially since it is conjunct the South Node loosely, but still there. He definitely indulged in things that weren't healthy for him. And with that Scorpio element, that is bad and toxic and not good. And maybe just touring and being out away from his home wasn't good. And he needed to be more follow his North Node traits, which I don't think he did a lot of in his life, but let's keep going here. Let's go look at the other chart where Venus is. And this is the 6 a.m. chart. And this is in the 12th house. So even more indulgence in things because the 12th house is about kind of a disassociating from all the trauma. Like I said, he grew up in extreme poverty and stuff like that. And I think this is the ruler, of course, of his north node is conjunct to south node, like I said, but it's in the sixth house where he needed to do more like daily health regimens and not do drugs and alcohol so much and maybe stay a little bit more at home. But instead, he just disassociated and spent all this money and stuff like that. And it's going to be about finances and balancing finances and enjoying and taking into simpler things in life. But instead, he just did this toxic, crazy stuff. And we'll get more on a south node here. It's a really interesting south node, especially in this placement. Let's go look at Mars. So it's right in the middle of his Jupiter and his moon here in his conjunction in the second house in Capricorn. So very hardworking. He did earn a lot of money through all of his ventures and stuff like that. He toured until a few days before he died, and maybe not toured, but he did performances, and he just loved performing and he loved being on stage. And he was just this hard worker and very diligent. And over 55 years, he's done so many shows. He's had so many albums. So he worked very hard again, but again, maybe there was some kind of emotional contentment because it is making this loose conjunction here with the moon, and it's a very tight conjunction with Jupiter. So the fortune that he got and the money that he got with the second house and Earth sign of Capricorn, that makes a lot of sense for them being there in the 6 a.m. chart. Also, that could be definitely high signs of poverty and stuff too. Great poverty and great wealth. He went from like rags to riches. He grew up in very poor conditions. Like I said, his bandmate Tony Iommi was working in factories, and Ozzy worked in factories too until they got famous. But Tony Iommi did lose his fingers working in a factory, making very little money. So he does take action in that kind of sense. But let's go look at the other chart. Check out his Mars. So Mars here in the 12th house, which is conjunct the ascendant, Mars is conjunct the ascendant, the moon, and Jupiter, and they're kind of dangling here in the 12th house, which makes a lot of sense too against sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And just disassociating, not taking his trauma to new lengths and things like that. It is making his opposition to Uranus and stuff there too, and he had to do different things and multiple things. Good argument against that, just taking not knowing who he is and not knowing what he's coming from, I think is more in the 12th house because the 12th house shrouds and hides things. Jupiter's in its traditional rulership there as well in the Piscean 12th house theme, again, drugs and substance abuse and escaping from things, not really taking into account into reality. That could definitely be a good argument right there as well. Okay, let's look at Jupiter. So Jupiter takes things one way or the other. It brings bounty and fortune and things like that in 12th house. So if it's in the 12th house, according to the 10 a.m. chart up here, and it's conjunct Mars and stuff like that. So partying and being reckless and impulsive and stuff with drugs and alcohol, this does make a lot of sense. Expanding the fortune, but down here in the second house, it seemed to make a lot more sense. We'll get to that in a second. But yeah, just bringing this expansion and forth, just like living in a whole new world and creating this. Maybe he didn't know who he was, but this is conjunct the ascendant, like he's lost of who he really is, and maybe he did find himself, but he just seemed to hit the right chord at 19 and just figured out, well, he got famous and rich, but that doesn't necessarily equate to happiness. But Jupiter there in Capricorn, it seems like I'm always gravitating toward people with Jupiter and Capricorn. So there isn't a lot of manifestation there. And I think Jupiter in a debilitated state in the 12th house probably wouldn't make a lot of sense. I think it'd make more sense in the second house because he did get that fortune. I think Jupiter in the 12th house is a tougher placement. Of course, it's not the end of the world for him. But going back to this, we see the Jupiter here is in the second house. Again, great wealth, great fame, things like that. It's actually making this trine, I think, is another argument for the 6 a.m. chart to Saturn, which is conjunct its house cusp up here in Virgo. So that's pretty damning too. And it's also making a sextile or this trine over here to its north node and this grand trine. So he's just able to make money just being his crazy self and stuff like that. So I think Jupiter and earning that abundance and earning that wealth, maybe with the help of Sharon here, I'm feeling that Sharon is that 11th house moon or that second house moon there. Maybe there's some feminine influence kind of help keep him on track and make him successful. Speaking of Saturn, that is making that trine here. It is in the 9th house, barely. The cusp of the 10th house is 8 degrees Virgo, while this is 6 degrees Virgo. So 2-degree conjunction, pretty tight. Again, about wealth and money, since it's an earth sign, working hard and working diligent. Again, it could be about like health and fitness and stuff like that. But obviously that wasn't. He did stay in shape and exercise while he was touring and things like that. But yeah, kind of like what you need to do. So if it's technically in the 9th house, we might throw it in the 10th house, floating around there on that cusp. So it's very strong Saturn. So he kind of wanted that control and stuff over. I mean, he earned his fortune touring around the world and things like that. So that 9th house element may seem there. but it's also a lot of hardship and things like that being for him. I know he was like a dual citizen in America and UK and went back and forth. He did stay in England his last few years of his life, but a lot of hard work and dedication. But there's also a lot of limitation and things there. I don't know if he got in any kind of trouble being an immigrant or anything like that, but let's look at the other chart and see what we get. So Saturn here is in the eighth house in Virgo rather than the ninth house. So hardship of showing intimacy and sex and things like that and sharing other people's wealth and stuff like that. He had a long relationship with Sharon. They were always he didn't seem shy away from sharing anything like that, like any intimacy or anything like that with her. I know there was some alleged affairs and stuff like that, but this is in this position, it is making a trine over here to the ascendant and the Mars and Jupiter. So again, his face and stuff showing that. But going to his career, his midheaven, I think that makes a lot more sense here with this 6 a.m. chart. You can see that trine right there, and it's just going to this stellium over here and over to the north node. I think that just makes more sense to me. Next, let's look at the Uranus. So you got the sixth house Uranus here on the 10 a.m. chart in Gemini. I know that final Black Sabbath show was on the 5th. I think Uranus went into Gemini on the 7th, I think. So it was kind of like 2 days before that return. So that's kind of seeing there. He was only 76, so he is about 8 years shy of his Uranian return. And he's a very late Uranus and Gemini at 29 degrees, and it is retrograde, but it is close to his descendant here. Well, obviously, Ozzy wasn't known for his day jobs in the factories in Birmingham before the Black Sabbath days. So he did need something different, not a day-to-day routine, not the day jobs that he did. Obviously, he became a very successful singer and musician, and he created a new genre of music. And it is making that trine over here to Venus, which does represent music, and it is conjunct the 10th house there. So that is actually pretty interesting. And this is a 10 a.m. chart. But again, he just like rebels against this kind of thing. It's making a 6 degree aspect to his descendant. And the ruler of that is Mercury. So he does it through his voice, the 11th house there. So it's kind of like what you rebel against, it's what you defy. And I guess he defied the different traditional day jobs and things like that. And of course, made a career as a musician. Should have put more time in this and done it. Just slow down. Okay, now let's look at the Uranus here. It's in the eighth house rather than the sixth house. Still making that trine, of course, to Venus and that south node. So pretty loose to that Venus, actually, but I think it's substituting anyways because these are making a conjunction. But the way he didn't really hear about his sexual life and stuff too much. You didn't hear what he was behind closed doors. I know, of course, the affairs, maybe that would definitely show a lot of promiscuity, of course, and having multiple partners and sex with multiple people and stuff like that. But I never heard of a giant scandal, but maybe it just Sharon just kept it hush and didn't really want to interfere. Maybe she just didn't really care. Who knows? Maybe he had an unconventional relationship. I think both charts, because the other one, the 10 a.m. one, was reflecting strange relationships and different relationships, especially in Gemini, just having different partners and stuff like that. So I think they both apply to this sort of thing. Going back here to this chart. So both sexuality in different ways, sources and stuff. So maybe he was close with his and Sharon's money. Maybe they had a joint account. And why'd you spend $60,000 on cocaine, Ozzy? Well, I guess I better the drug use down. YouTube are kind of picky about that sort of thing. What? Stop it. I said I'm recording. Stop it. Close the door. Neptune. Let's look at Neptune. 11th house, Libra. So about groups and relationships, and this is the second chart. So maybe he felt like an outsider and didn't belong. Maybe he was in a group, and maybe that's why he just did the drugs when he was with people. It was just a big party. I know the stories with Motley Crue and things like that, where they were on various substances and they kept arguing or dueling and daring each other with Tommy Lee, and Ozzy ended up like, snorting ants, and Tommy Lee ended up urinating and he was about to drink his own urine, but Ozzy drank it before he could do it and things like that. One day when he got drunk, he drank 4 fists of vodka, attacked and strangled Sharon and almost killed her. So he just disassociated when he was groups and just lost control, just being with the influence of other people there, I think. Again, we talked about his nodal and Alice is here. So yeah, just when he was around other people, he just went crazy. That became another point here for this one. Going to the 10th house, we'll see where Venus is at in this chart. Our Neptune is over here in the ninth house again. So doing things in other cultures and stuff like that, maybe getting intoxicated and escaping and not dealing with reality while he was on tour. Like I said, he got in a lot of trouble for pissing in the Alamo. That was home in his home country, but I heard he pissed at Buckingham Palace and all sorts of stuff. He just urinated on very important landmarks, like for various people in various cultures. So maybe that's another thing, but 11th house one makes a lot more sense to me. But yeah, good in relationships and with people and fairness and stuff like that. I know he was kind of an advocate for people's rights and things like that. I know he stood up for gays. One of his guitar players made a homophobic slur on stage, and as he corrected him, he was about inclusion and social justice, and he really advocated for peace. If you actually listen to the lyrics of Crazy Train, one of his most popular songs, it definitely has a positive message. I don't think Ozzy really meant to hurt anybody in his life. But of course, when he was high and intoxicated, he became a loose cannon. Let's check out Pluto. So Pluto, either the ruler of his ascendant on the other chart, and the ruler of his north node is in the 7th house, and it's in Leo. So he was a boomer. So this generation had this need to kind of be seen and heard and be able to express themselves. They created some great music and stuff. Of course, when they came into power, it came very corrupt. Of course, he was with Sharon, so he did have that one-on-one relationship with her, kind of toxic. Like I said, he became intoxicated and almost strangled her to death. So that's a Plutonian theme there. Definitely not a way. It definitely lets us ruler of the south node, I should say, things that he needs to get away from. Again, it's conjunct Venus, which is a ruler of his north node. So he just kept going in a circle, chasing his tail, kind of like Hitler did. Like we talked about Hitler in his chart reading. I'm not comparing the two. Ozzy was nothing like Hitler, obviously, but he had that north node in Cancer, but the south node, the moon, the ruler of his north node was conjunct his south node, went away quick. So I think people with their nodal rulers for their north node conjuncting their south node, I think that kind of creates a lot of problems and creates a lot of confusion. But yeah, in the 7th house, so he's gonna get like deep, dark, intimate with other people and relationships and things like that. Also about power and control in a very creative way. And it's also retrograde too, so he probably had a hard time expressing this Plutonian notion and probably could have been cured and stuff. I think Sharon was really a big influence on him. So yeah, the one-on-one relationships in the 7th house. It does kind of make a lot of sense, but let's go look at the other side. Looking at the 6 a.m. chart here, his Pluto is in the 9th house. So I guess maybe when he got on the road and he was touring and stuff like that, the satanic allegations, this makes perfect sense. So Black Sabbath and stuff, he was accused of being a Satanist and kind of brought that dark, heavy theme to music and to the main culture. First hit, Black Sabbath by Black Sabbath, was talking about kind of like this end of the world situation where Satan came, but it was based off a horror movie. So again, the ruler of the South Node, kind of straying away from that. But honestly, he was really Christian, but he was known for his dark satanic elements and his music and stuff like that. So that is making a huge, huge aspect of that and that stellium right here. And at this creative, flowing, talented aspect of the trine is also going to Mercury and stuff where I need a break. God damn already. Okay. We already looked at Pluto in the 7th house. So let's look at his Chiron here, which 0 degrees in Sagittarius, and the cusp of his 11th house is 2 degrees Sagittarius. So this would be about career and things like that. I know about 1979, 1980, he was kicked out of Black Sabbath for his substance abuse problems and his lack of direction and his lack of caring. I know the other guys in Black Sabbath kicked him out because he stopped really having that drive he had for his work. And instead of going in the studio and listening to his vocals over and perfecting it, he just recorded it. Then he didn't even listen to his record until it came out. So they really didn't like the lack of professionalism. So they kicked him out, but that drove him to start his own solo career, which was even more successful financially than Black Sabbath. So I guess maybe that is an explanation there. But again, it's about foreign things, about religion and stuff like that. He was very big Christian, always wore crosses, but he had that satanic element of wearing upside down crosses and talking themes of darkness and death and things like that. With Black Sabbath mostly, but not so much in his solo stuff. He was a little more optimistic and things like that. But I know he did grow up in poverty and stuff. Let's see what the other chart, where's Chiron is. Okay, looking at the 6 a.m. chart, Chiron is in the 1st house. So there was a wound to him, maybe his religion or his philosophy, or maybe he couldn't find his own religion, or he couldn't find his own philosophy, or he couldn't find his own voice. No, he didn't really get singing techniques. He didn't learn how to become a vocalist. He didn't take lessons. So he damaged his throat and damaged his vocal cords. So I know it was a hit or miss. I remember I seen Black Sabbath maybe like 15 years ago. Saw them twice. I never saw Ozzy solo, unfortunately. I wish I did, and I can't now, obviously. But I saw Black Sabbath at the 2005 Ozfest. I don't know why they ever got rid of Ozfest. Ozfest was awesome. And I saw it just as a Black Sabbath tour later on. I can't remember which year it was, but at that time for the second tour, his voice is already going. In certain concerts, he would basically not be able to sing, and people would get pissed off and then get their money's worth. So he damaged his voice, part of himself. So I think that is a first house thing. Growing up in poverty and stuff, I know he was bullied a lot. I think he was a lot smaller than his peers. I think I always heard the Ozzy thing just meant like bitch or something in British slang. I know it's short for Oscar or Oswald or something like that, but I don't know exactly where the Ozzy nickname came from, but that's what he was known. His first name was actually John, so it didn't come from that, obviously. Oh, look, there's almost a yod there. Not quite. Very loose one, actually. But anyways, let's look at his nodal analysis. We already talked about this quite a bit. His south node, which is making a loose conjunction, but I think a applicable one in the 12th house in Scorpio. I think this is the biggest thing going towards the 6 a.m. chart, where he's born around 6 a.m. and his north node, which is 180-degree cross, of course, is in Taurus in the 6th house. And the ruler of this Taurus north node is Venus, which is making a conjunction to a south node. And the ruler of his south node is in Scorpio. So we got to look at Pluto up here. Okay. So again, the 12th house is about mental illness, and Ozzy was known to be crazy as shit. He was probably bipolar. He partied endlessly, notoriously. He died several times and was revived. And I remember watching a TV show like Ozzy Osbourne Medical Miracle. Like, how is he not dead yet? And he should have died 40, 50 years ago, probably. Most people would have in most circumstances that he did. He was just nuts. He bit off the head of a bat. He thought it was a rubber bat. People threw it on stage and he thought it was just like this prop or something. So he bit it off and ended up getting rabies and things like that. And he had to get all these rabies vaccinations. And later during a video shoot, he was messing with doves and he took one of the doves out and bit that thing's head off. So guess he wasn't very nice to animals that could rule nature and Taurus and stuff like that. So that might have been like a South Node thing. But he was just known as the madman, just crazy partying on stage, just all over the place. Even when he was older, he would run around like a teenager. And so, yeah, he just partied relentlessly and he lived hard. What he needed to do was slow down, learn patience, take care of himself. In the 6th house is about exercise and taking care of your body and focusing on your health and your day-to-day routines and stuff like that. But he just threw all that away and partied. But the hard thing about it, just having this south or the north node ruler conjunct the south node. So it's like I'm trying to do these things, but it's right here and it's influencing that thing. So probably like sex and relationships. And but he created this dark music, but it just kind of going back and forth, ping-ponging back and forth. So it was very confusing and very, very reckless to Ozzy. But damn, he lived one hell of a life. He just lived the way he wanted to live, and nothing to apologize about. And like I said, this grand shrine here, just going to his north node, just pinging around north node over here to Saturn, which is conjunct his midheaven, creating a big, stable financial career and financial abundance down here, just going forward and trudging forward, partying relentlessly and being impulsive and reckless and just being himself and having Sharon for the ride and abusing and domestic violence and hurting her. But she was kind of like his stable point. She was the one that grounded him and gave him action and just gave him all this glory with that Jupiter and things like that. But before we get too far here, let's jump to the other screen. So here we got the same thing, obviously, with the South Node conjunct Venus in Scorpio, but it's in the 9th house, which is more foreign religion, things like that. And it's going towards the 3rd house, which again is about communication and vocals and singing and expressing yourself and using words and language and stuff like that. So he needed to become a singer and he needed to become that. But this is making that trine against his ascendant, which is Jupiter, and his Mars and stuff are again. So that's a big argument there as well. But it's going to Saturn in the 8th house, which he did have a deep partnership with other people like Sharon Osbourne, and there was like Randy Rhoads and all these other people, and Zach Wild and the guys from Black Sabbath. But I think it just makes more sense with the Saturn being conjunct the midheaven and that trine with his north node and this conjunction here. So he needed to stop traveling and be more local. He needed to be in his local environment around his own community and things like that with people. So I think the other one, I think was just the South Node in the 12th house in Scorpio. I think that is just Ozzy in a nutshell, just this crazy, unhinged guy, just partying recklessly and disassociating and not dealing with his trauma head on and not taking care of himself. I think that just makes a ton of more sense. I think I'm just going to switch to this other chart. Just There's good points in the 10 a.m. chart, but I think this 6 a.m. chart makes a lot more sense. It's just much more applicable. So let's kind of just tie some of this stuff together. So we talked about this trine here to this 11th house. We talked about this trine here to Uranus, Gemini in the 8th house, and this South Node and Venus combo. So he revolutionized music. And I think Uranus is the rebel rouser. He creates change, he usurps things by, back then it was just like blues and pop and the Beatles and stuff like that, but him and Black Sabbath just introduced this dark, heavy element of metal and down tuned their guitars and dropped their bass and just made this wall of sound that was fierce and dark and satanic. And he just changed music. He was just a revolutionary thing. So this trying to the South Node, again, just reckless partying. You didn't know what he was unpredictable. You didn't know what he was going to do. But again, this is just like all these trines, it's just unchanged and things like that. And he was this big element to mainstream and pop. And you didn't know what he was going to do. You didn't know he was going to live. He was going to die. But wow, he lived a life, crazy life. But we got this going, making an opposition to this over here. So again, his crazy, unstable, predictable nature going against all this stuff here. So sharing other people's resources and letting other people be in charge. So you earned all this money, but maybe that partnership of him just being sporadic and crazy and wild and stuff like that, an unpredictable kind of. I think at times he was broke. I know when he left Black Sabbath, I think he was just doing so many drugs and alcohol. He blew all of his money on that. He was just like sulking and crying and was super depressed and stuff like that. But he was just born and did it. And he guess when he really got with Sharon, I think Sharon really lifted him out of the gutter and brought him a new light. So again, people talk shit about Sharon Osbourne, but I don't think we would have had Ozzy Osbourne the way we knew him without Sharon there helping him and assisting him. So it's also making a quincunx, and this is kind of loose sextile. It's off by 4 degrees, but we'll still count that. So it's making a yod here. So a quincunx is like this annoying, frictional, pain in the ass type of energy. Again, just as sporadic. He was really ADHD too. It had learning disabilities, and is going to this first house stellium here of the Sun, Chiron, and Mercury. So again, maybe he just felt different. He felt odd and he could just not quite scratch and get it there. And he just indulged in all these eighth house things of this darkness and stuff that he embraced. He was really just trying to make a name for himself and be who he was. But there was just like this little mosquito buzzing around his head, this Uranian thing. And he just couldn't quite get grounded and he couldn't quite get roots and couldn't quite get started. He was just all over the place. And of course, it's making this thing to the North Node. He wanted to be big something. He wanted to be healthy and be there for his family, but his addictions and things like that just got in the way. And his North Node and his Gemini just in this agreement. Let's just party and be crazy and reckless and indulge all this stuff over here. I'm supposed to go towards Venus. I'm supposed to be more Venusian, but it's afflicted by all this Uranian energy and all this South Node energy and just all over the place and just being crazy and things like that. So he just had this like weird contorted message. He just needed to go more towards sustainability and practicality of his North Node, but he had to follow the ruler, and the ruler is up here. And I think that just causes a lot of recklessness and craziness. What else we got here? So we're making this stellium over here is making a square to his Saturn and his midheaven stuff over here. So again, he was just all over the place. Maybe that Mercury made him just like zippy and ADHD and unable to concentrate and unable to focus. And he had a wound with himself and a wound with his voice and a wound with the message he needed to deliver. And maybe that was just this frictional thing to his career. He kind of had something to prove and it just didn't flow very well. And I think that's where kind of like people like Sharon and stuff were able to ground him. His relationship, if he didn't have Randy Rhoads as a guitar player for a solo artist, it might not have even took off the ground. I think Randy Rhoads, then later Zach Wilde, was just this big defining element to his music and his sound. If he just got another guitar player, it might not have would have worked. Like he kind of relied a lot on Tony Iommi and Black Sabbath and everything like that. And that was kind of like his foundation. But his crazy recklessness, him being in charge and being the party animal that he was and things like that could have gotten away of his career. That's why Black Sabbath kicked him out, because he wasn't taking things seriously. He was just indulging in himself and sulking in himself. And this wound got the best of him. What else is that Chiron conjuncting? I wonder. Let's do this. Go to, why isn't it showing? Really? Okay. It's not working for some fucking reason. I don't know. It's not showing. Let me do something else real quick. If it'll work. Charts, pages. Why isn't it working? What the fuck? I'll be mad. Okay, so this big stellium right here is making this trine over here to Pluto. Again, this just happy-go-lucky, flowing energy that can just get out of control if you're not managing it, and just abusing the substances and falling in this darkness and embracing the darkness. I guess it's also the ruler of his chart because he has his Scorpio ascendant. We're just going off the 6 a.m. chart. I had to redo everything because my program crashed. The ruler of his south node. So the ascendant is like the pathway to the sun. He's supposed to be the Sagittarian first house sun, this adventurous, outgoing person with the philosophy I guess he created with heavy metal, just this new way of looking at life and living your life by traveling. And it was a huge part of his life was traveling and singing his songs and just to playing who he was, but he did these dark elements like Black Sabbath and Satanism and just destroying his own body with these substances. He ended up having Parkinson's disease, and that's what ended up taking his life. But he really needed to embrace the South Node traits, those Plutonian traits, those scorpionic traits. That just made Ozzy Ozzy. So that is pretty awesome. And unfortunately, it wasn't greatest thing to his health. And this also is making a sextile. Venus or the South Node itself is making a sextile to his midheaven and stuff too. So just the scorpionic, plutonic traits of using himself as a bulldozer or a battering ram just to get where he wants to be. And yeah, that's where he's coming from. I think that's all I have. So let me know in the comments. Do you think he was born at 6 a.m. or he's born closer to 10 a.m.? Of course, neither of those times are right. We need a proper rectification, and well, we can't do it with him, obviously, because he died. But rest in peace, Ozzy. And your music was just this brilliant work, and you inspired so many people. And wow, it was a hard loss. But all right, just let me know what you guys think and subscribe. I appreciate it. Thank you.